I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by award-winning science fiction author and space scientist Dr. David Brin. In addition to writing dozens of best-selling novels and short stories, some of which have been adapted for film and television, David is a 2010 Fellow of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, helped establish the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, serves on the advisory board of NASA's Innovative and Advanced Concepts Group, and does futurism consulting for diverse organizations, including the U.S. Department of Defense, Procter Gamble, SAP, Google, and many more. David is the winner of numerous awards and honors, including the prestigious Nebula, Hugo, and Locus Awards for science fiction, and holds a PhD in space science from the University of California. So, David, welcome back, sir. Well, it is always a pleasure and an honor.
Well, hello, Tim, and hello to your perspicacious top percentile listeners.
Well, so you and I have talked about AI and AGI a few times now, and we are just coming into 2024. We're coming out of a rather quiet holiday season, but before that, it was absolutely insane in terms of AI news. And so we had some headlines come up in the November, December timeframe, and I said, you know what, I have to get David to talk on these topics. Partly because there is a ton of confusion out there, rightfully so. Things are moving forward very rapidly, but I think there's also a lot of hype out there, and it's just adding to all of this confusion. So let me start by asking what your thoughts are on the current hype cycle that we're seeing in the media with ChatGPT, AI, and AGI in general.
Well, the hype cycle is certainly not helpful. It has various purposes. For example, 6 months ago, perhaps more like 8, when GPT 3.5 was hitting the news cycles, you got all these people going online. This pair of young fellows were doing a podcast declaring that it's the end of the world and that we should declare a moratorium on artificial intelligence research to get a handle on it. And the number of people who signed the petitions and things like that for a moratorium was comprehensive. It was probably on the order of 70 to 80% of the people, top people working in the field, including competitors. I came on and said, this is going to go away with embarrassed fizzle within a couple of months. I was proved right for several reasons. First off, across my life, there has only been one technological moratorium that ever actually functioned. They are very, very difficult to impose, especially in a free society. That one was the 1990s Asilomar moratorium on laboratory work and genetic engineering of potential disease organisms and things like that. All of the stars lined up. The field was fairly limited because it was lab work. It was fairly easy to keep track of who was not cooperating. There were a number of reasons why the Asilomar moratorium worked. And it worked fabulously. It kept us safe with revised lab procedures that they came up with it within 6 months until we had the COVID events in Wuhan, which arguably involved failure to keep to those procedures. Not one of the conditions that allowed the 1990s Asilomar moratorium to function, not one, exists today regarding AI. It was an utterly impossible thing, and it was justified by historical lies. These two young guys were, and a bunch of other people were saying, well, that's what kept us safe from nuclear war. after World War II, you know, it was the moratorium. No, no, no. There were proposals for moratoria on atom bombs and on atomic research, and these petitions were all utterly ignored. What kept us safe, and my generation, perhaps probably yours as well, Tim, all the males of my generation were scheduled to die on some horrible World War III battlefield that was prevented by St. Bomb, by the reciprocal terror of this technological innovation. So I talk about that in my nonfiction book, Vivid Tomorrows, which will be in the description below. But in any event, this was just 6 or 8 months ago, and you hear nothing about a moratorium now. So why were they doing this? Why were they doing this? Well, for one thing, it's to help convince juries in liability trials in the future. Well, I tried for a moratorium. So it's a self-protective measure that was never intended to be of the slightest use. And I wrote about, you know, why it wouldn't work, and it hasn't. Now, there are some things that, you know, in this roller coaster, I know it's one of your later questions, but this whole business with Sam Altman a couple months ago, where the board of directors for OpenAI fired him for irresponsible behavior in releasing the what I call golem, and I can't believe nobody else is calling them golems, because it's generative large language models. What else would you call them? His release of the OpenAI large language model was irresponsible. The board of directors was completely right. As it happens, it was probably all for the best, because what happened, because Altman released this thing, and therefore others released theirs to hurriedly catch up, is that the 2023 model models were what people first encountered regarding these large language models and the visual correlates, the visual ones like you know, the ones that make all the artists are upset about. And I believe it was absolutely salutary and the best thing for us that these clumsy versions from 2023 got out there. Why do I think so? Because they were released while they still cannot pass wary Turing tests. Now, what do I mean by that? They are already passing Turing tests in that the great cyberneticist, founder of cybernetics, along with John von Neumann, Alan Turing, at the end of World War II, he said, we'll know when the machines are fully intelligent when a machine in one room and another person in another room hold a teletype conversation with you, and you can't tell which one is the machine. Well, that has already passed it for the unwary Turing test. And that is, if you're getting emails just out of the blue or in a comment section, these golems are capable of using language and pertinence to a degree where their quirks could be dismissed as the quirks of a quirky commenter on this site, or some quirky human writing to you. And if you're not wary, you're going to have an assumption that this is a person. And a lot of people do. A lot of people aren't wary. To the best of my knowledge, I have not yet been fooled. because I do wary Turing tests that look for a sense of overview perspective on the topic at hand. And mind you, there are many humans today of both political parties in America, one in particular, who would not pass a wary Turing test because their, shall we say, their use of language is reflexive. But I can hear right now the giggling of AIs. Yeah, you haven't been fooled, Brin. Yeah, sure, you haven't been fooled. Because that's my job. My job is to hear things, even if they're not there, things that make for a plausible story. But that's an aside. The point is that next year, these things will be smooth. They'll be passing even wary Turing tests. So why did I say it was a good thing that it happened in 2023? Because people got used to the notion that just because something is skilled doesn't mean that it's sapient. And that could be said about a number of humans as well. These programs are skilled. They get their skills by brute force, iterative, probabilistic sentence completion. And that's what these things are. They are iterative, meaning over and over and over and over. Probabilistic, going for what's a probable, likely useful answer. Sentence completion. Their objective is to complete a sentence that is highly probable to be accepted in the context of the sentences that came before. And generally, the data set that it chose that's pertinent to the topic. So these things are very skilled. And when an actual AGI comes along, it will be able to use these to instantly be able to speak. But what happened in 2023, thanks to Sam Altman's highly irresponsible behavior, was a good thing in my opinion. And that is that a large part of the public got inoculated to the notion that we have to be wary, and these things clearly are not, as of 2023, sapient beings, despite the fact that thousands of people all over the globe are declaring that they are. People with sense can tell that they're not.
Well, and so David, I want to jump into your background briefly, because I would say that you are incredibly and uniquely positioned to speak on this topic. And what I mean by that is I see lots of different subject matter experts talking on the granular aspects of AI and large language models and various forms of processing, neural networks, and human speech emulation. But you predicted the first robotic empathy crisis back in 2017 with a 3 to 5 year window before we started to see it happen. That happened right on schedule. You wrote the grand finale to Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. Asimov was one of the great figures behind this whole revolution that we're seeing right now. And you also helped establish the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UCSD, which, again, Clarke was a key figure, right? I mean, the HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey. So a lot of these long-term trends that we're seeing in AI go back to visions that you either have yourself or have carefully curated for, the masters who came before us, I guess. Now, do you see today's trends diverging from those earlier predictions? Have they diverged at all from your predictions, or does it seem like we're on some kind of a trajectory, I guess?
Well, yeah, in 2017 at World of Watson, I did that famous or infamous prediction that in 5 years' time, and it happened within the month of 5 years, that we would suffer the first robotic empathy crisis. It came about a little differently than I expected, because I expected it to be visual as well as art, as well as text. But a guy at Google, a senior researcher, fell in love with one of these golems and said, this is a sapient being. Anybody with any sense who's talked or conversed with that version knew that this was, if you do a wary Turing test, that it's just, it was simply not true. But eventually we will have things that operate either for us or manipulating us, the way, like in that movie, an excellent movie about artificial intelligence called Her, Her. Now, the notion of automatons that think goes way back in science fiction. In Asimov's day, the assumption was that they would have to take physical form as humanoid robots. There is reason to believe that that actually is something that's going to come back. Because if you take a look at the one sapient life form that we know of in the entire universe, us, that's how we did it. We created utterly useless fetuses, the most useless babies and infants of any species on the planet, and we spill them out into the world and let them skin their knees, bat against rocks and fall down and cry and take care of them until, it used to be 13 years and then 15 years and then 18 years. And now most of us boomer parents are convinced that our children might grow up when they're 30. In any event, the point is that is the only way to get a sapient being that we know is proved. So it may turn out over the long run that we'll have to put proto-sapient, proto-intelligent computers onto little humanoid bodies and foster them into human homes, because batting against the world and falling down and getting up again happens to be the way to make an intelligent being. Well, it's how we do it. Personally, I give that maybe 5% odds that we will have to go that route. But if we have to adopt proto-AIs as children and raise them as foster children, we know how to do that. We've done it before. We've proved that we can love strange little parasitical beings that aren't from our own loins. We've proved that we can do that. And I talk about that in my novel Existence. But the other thing, now Clarke, writing later, did the transition to a computer being the locus of AI. And later science fiction authors did the transition to software. So you see, the residency of the sapients shifted from what Asimov could imagine, which was a clanking robot that became smoother over time, to Clarke saying it's a computer, to software. And that's what everybody assumes now, because these entities are software. In my recent paper in Wired, I talk about how we need to go around, back circle around, and insist that these entities have at least an anchor, a thread, an anchor, a sense of identity in an actual piece of computer memory, an actual physical computer somewhere. And I have a reason for pushing that concept, And that is that the only way we ever got a soft landing somewhat from human predators is by applying accountability. And you can't apply accountability to something that has no physical reality and it can make infinite copies of itself. You have people all over the planet who are saying, we need to give rights to these sapient beings. How do you give the vote to something that can make infinite numbers of copies of itself? These are vexing problems, and they're not going to be solved by reflex Hollywood cliches. And so I'll come back to, over the course of this, I'll probably come back to this notion of why, what is the reason why we have to give these entities a sense of individuality, and why no one out there at Google, OpenAI, or any of those places is even remotely talking about that.
In terms of current headlines, I wanted to ask about, you touched on the firing and then rehiring of Sam Altman, the CEO of the CEO of OpenAI. Now, there is also a new program called Q Star that started making headlines around this time. And this gives ChatGPT mathematically based logical and reasoning abilities. What's interesting about that, not a whole lot is out there about this yet, but The Guardian wrote that it was so powerful that it alarmed staff. And it's being called a big step towards artificial general intelligence. Although from what I understand, they're not claiming, at least the majority of people aren't claiming that it is AGI. So, this just accelerates that pace further, right?
Well, as I said, the fundamental method underlying all of these different variants on golems, generative large language models, and that includes where you replace the word language with visual representations, or in the case of Q-Star, mathematical or modeling methodologies. I said that this is, I oversimplified, that these are iterative, probabilistic, sentence completion systems. Now, what happens is you create a program that can sift vast amounts of input data, but that's not enough. You have to have the parameter of an output. And then what happens is it goes round and round and round and round, millions of copies of itself, testing, going round and round and round and round. That's where the iterative comes in. And so it finds a highly probable match between the data set and the set of criteria for an output that the programmers have asked for, and many people are calling this prompt. But of course, the prompt is the surface customer portion of the requisite program output. The companies that making these things have the, under the surface, the parameters that control this matching. By its very nature, this cyclical approach has no top-down overview of the process. Now, there are attempts to provide an overview by testing these probabilistic answers as they're going along and trying to put them in context. Well, that's why I don't think it's time yet to count programs like Watson out, because they are more old-fashioned, the way we thought we'd make AGI, in that they deal with programs that take a macro view of factual knowledge. So what I have tended to say, and I can hear those AIs giggling again, I can pick them up through my teeth. Yes, I can. They're giggling at me now for making another assumption, perhaps wishful thinking. But I don't believe these things will be what we would call intelligent or sapient until another portion of this mix gets added. And so I'm a believer that we should not stop investing in macroscopic fact and knowledge systems like Watson, because I think they'll make a real difference. Until then, what we have is a set of programs that attempt to please their customers and their owners by matching great big data inputs with outputs. Now, there's a whole lot of aspects to this. For instance, people are filing lawsuits. I didn't give you permission to use my data. You know, and a lot of people are offended that their data is being used. New York Times is upset because news aggregator versions of these golems are just, you know, mining New York Times articles without payment. For one thing, this is a major reason why we need micropayments. And micropayment systems have all failed for 25 years for reasons that I believe I know and that people can find underneath in the description, where I have an article or two about micropayments. I think I know why they failed, and I think I know what the secret sauce is, because we desperately need it, because people are sick of 30 years of advertising dominating the web. It's resulted in just this huge parasitic suck on every person out there providing goods and services, because all the profits from the advertising flow into maybe 5 pockets. And it's malignant on the content quality that we see in the world. So the ability to be able to buy a New York Times article for a nickel and avoid all advertising, and not having to sign in to the New York Times silo, which is what people hate, that's a reason for micropayments. But in addition, what we'll probably have once micropayments work is nanopayments and even picopayments, because then you'll be able to be paid for every use of your information. As I point out in the Transparent Society, and I will get this to show, as I pointed out in the Transparent Society in 1997, and it's totally non-obsolete, alas, the claim that you can stop anybody else from knowing something because it's your knowledge is insane.
Yeah.
It is insane and counterproductive to say thou shalt not know something. Your safety in this world is not preserved by making others ignorant. You create a world of blinding fog, and everybody's less safe. You're safe if you know more, and you can catch the peeping Toms and the voyeurs and those who would abuse you. But that doesn't mean that you don't have an interest in your information. Jaron Lanier made that distinction between owning information and having an interest in your information. And if someone uses your DNA in a 10 million person study that comes up with a new medicine, you don't have a right to prevent that new medicine from coming. But you do have a right to have a claim on whatever society decides is a fair royalty to the people who contributed to the data set. And if you were one of 10 million, it's going to take a while for it to add up to a cent or a nickel or a dime. But those pico payments and nano payments should accrue. They should be part of our civilization. And that's what AI is going to be really good at when we get, and that takes us full circle back to Q star, because that's what Q star is going to be very, very good at, accounting. It's going to keep track of obligations and smart contracts. And that's all to the good if we can trust it and if we make decent laws.
Well, so that takes me, actually, that's a perfect segue into my next question, which was about the premature adoption of AI in today's society. Now, the examples that I had were Tesla's autopilot feature has been making headlines for, it's been accused of causing several vehicle collisions, as well as large language models like ChatGPT, which hallucinate and make up facts and figures out of thin air, which sometimes get used, right? People are making business decisions based on graphs and, other things that are being generated by these LLMs. And if they contain errors, if it contains these hallucinations, that could lead to, I guess, issues further on down the road. So
also,
do you think
the deliberate computer-generated lies. 2024 is going to be the year of the lie tsunami, the fire hose of lies. But it's important to remember that this is not the first time this has happened. Ever since Gutenberg invented the printing press, the first effect of Gutenberg's printing press was to show thousands of people all over Europe that they were blind because they tried to read these books and they couldn't read them. So that created a vast market for glass lenses. Suddenly they were being produced 1,000-fold compared to before the printing press, and that led to telescopes, microscopes, and so on. All across the subsequent 600 years, there have been repeated, or shall we say recurring, revolutions in what we can know, what we can see, and what we can pay attention to. Gutenberg expanded what we can know. The glass lenses expanded what we can see. Perspective expanded what we could even notice, because we weren't even able to notice some things about our world until we started realizing perspective. Always, in every one of these cases, that event or after, pessimists said this is going to mess up everything because it's going to fill the world with lies and it's going to confuse people, and normal people can't drink from the fire hose, so this needs to be controlled. Always there were optimists saying this is going to make everybody better. They're going to be more knowledgeable. They'll see better. They'll know better. They'll make better decisions. Always the pessimists proved right first. The printing press's #1 product was horrible, scandalous religious tracts that exacerbated the 30 Years' War, Protestants against Catholics, Catholics against Protestants. But over time, people adapted. And people started reading more and more books about other lands, other places. And they started to become more inclusive. Gradually, it's been a rough, 400 years, 500 years. As a matter of fact, one of these revolutions in what we can see and know almost killed us all. The one in the 1930s, radios and loudspeakers, were used by horrible, horrible men to manipulate masses of people. because they amplified the human voice to godlike proportions. And the only reason humanity was saved was because in the English language, the masterful manipulators of sound, of the voice, happened to be on our side. I'm speaking of FDR and Churchill, etc. And there were some really nasty ones in America at that time, but FDR overwhelmed them. The point is, and by the way, let's all remember that our parents in the greatest generation adored one living human above all others, and his name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Do you know who the next person they adored almost as much?
I would say Eisenhower or JFK. One of those two.
Eisenhower was liked, and he was somebody who, God, I miss him. But no, it was a guy named Jonas Salk.
Okay.
The man who saved summer. For my generation, not yours, Tim, but mine was released from prison in the summer because suddenly our parents were no longer terrified of polio. And people tend to forget how adored Salk was, and the people who came after him, who drove so many diseases into near extinction. All right, so in any event, what I'm getting at is that these revolutions in what we can know, see, comprehend, accelerate, and every time, except with TV, every time the bad uses got the jump on us. And TV actually began from the very beginning being extremely useful for human maturity. Saved the life, both Gandhi and MLK credited the cameras with saving their lives and enabling them to tweak the consciences of the world. Today we are on the verge of another of these, with one major difference. Everything is so much faster that we don't have time for the normal cycle. So the malevolent and terrible uses of these new technologies, we have to get across that barrier and start making them positive this year. Yeah. And it won't happen by itself like it happened the other cases. We have to intelligently choose to institute methods so that these AI systems are beneficial as soon as possible.
Well, and David, if I could ask, does the rapid pace of AI development mean that we've crossed the knee of the curve in accelerating change? Do you think that we are actually leading up that exponential part of the curve with the singularity? And if so, do you think that we may see it arrive before Kurzweil's 2045 estimate?
Well, I have generally tended in both my novel Earth and my novel Existence were set in around 2038 because I see that as being pretty much my schedule. But I'm lately of the belief that it's going to probably be sooner than that. That doesn't necessarily mean that the world of 2045 or 2038 is going to be unrecognizable. People would be justified in saying, yeah, I've heard that before. Where are the flying cars? Well, in fact, I predicted that 2024 would be the year of the flying car, and it will be. The rich who have been abandoning us in the airlines for these undertaxed, shall we say, private jet airports. And we should all surround these private jet airports with mobs waving placards that say, "Get back into first class where you belong. You sit in that seat that's only 3 times as comfortable as mine and drink your damn mimosa and put up with the same delays and use your rich person influence to help solve these problems." Because whenever they abandon a mode of transportation, it goes to hell.
Yeah.
So for our own benefit, we need to make 2024 the year we surround all those private jet airports. But that's just a superficiality of the notion that AI will have no reason to treat us with respect if we cannot get ourselves organized. And these things will be convincing. They will pass Turing tests. We'll all believe in them. But the hallucinations, both deliberate and accidental, are going to cause a lot of trouble this next year. And a point I make in my Wired piece is that there is only one kind of entity on this globe that's going to be able to track and denounce or correct the faults of AI. And that's other AI.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I was going to ask, I think that's probably my final question. You've talked about that in the past, having AI police itself, providing some kind of an incentive system. And I mean, if nothing else, that's because it is capable of taking action and making decisions so much more rapidly and decisively than human beings can. The only thing that can police it is other AI, right?
Well, it's likely that it will be the old Hollywood cliche of the human plus other partner, detective partner. This was done so charmingly in the wonderful movie Alien Nation.
Yeah.
It was done in the Dirty Harry movies, where it was highly unusual that Dirty Harry had to have a female detective colleague. You know, in that The Last Action Hero, Arnold Schwarzenegger is standing in line, and the Hasidic rabbi detective is paired with the cartoon donkey detective. All right, so these teams work best because the human can provide that gritty, you know, earthy grounding. But yeah, it's absolutely essential that we get to the point where AIs can denounce other AIs. What I find so depressing these days is that nobody, especially not Americans, seems to have any comprehension of human history. Why do I arrogantly say that? I'm an astrophysicist, I'm a science fiction author, I'm a pundit. But the point is, almost all science fiction authors are more obsessed with history, the great story of how we clawed our way. You know, 4 steps forward, 6 steps back, 3 to the side. With misery and horror out of caves and muck and nobody helping us. To the point where we can discuss the creation of godlike beings, not only AIs, but our children, our grandchildren, who will be augmented in so many ways. That story of human history is apparently ignored. If you look across the last 6,000 years, what worked and what didn't work? What didn't work was chiding, moralizing, thou shalt not, try to be good, try to be nice. All of these things, setting a good example even. All of these things are good parenting, and they work on the roughly 50% of humans who are already inclined to be nice people. And they don't work worth squat on predators. They never have. As a matter of fact, they give shelter to predators. What finally worked? How did we escape from 6,000 years of wretched feudalism? And a worldwide oligarchy is trying to reestablish it right now as we speak, pulling out the stops and attacking all the skilled professionals and all the fact people in the American Enlightenment and around the world. Every fact profession, from scientists, now the FBI and the intelligence agencies and the military officer corps, all fact professions under attack in order to restore feudalism. How did we escape from feudalism? How did we escape from it with Adam Smith showing us how and the American founders actually doing it? We did it by establishing the Enlightenment notion of reciprocal accountability. Instead of priests and kings top down saying, instead, enable people to hold each other accountable and to hold the mighty accountable. And what enables us to do that? Light. Being able to shine light even on the mighty. And so what we have is a parallel. Look, Tim, when you are attacked, and you have been in your life, by a hyper-predatory, hyper-intelligent entity called a lawyer, what do?
Hire another lawyer.
You hire your own hyper-intelligent, hyper-predatory entity in order to counter the one that's attacking you on someone else's behalf. By creating a system in which these hyper-intelligent, hyper-predatory beings called lawyers are constantly sicked upon each other, we wound up with a lot of aggravations and frustrations, but the best civilization humanity has ever had, by orders of magnitude compared to all previous civilizations combined. We face an identical situation now. Already attacks by feral, hyper-skilled, and often predatory new beings are emerging from the new ecosystem we've been creating. There's sunlight, plants, herbivores, carnivores, parasites in the classic ecosystem, and in the new one, it's human-generated electricity and data clusters and all of that. It's a complete parallel. And right now we have free-floating organisms, and we need desperately to create at least the equivalent of turning wolves into dogs, because then we stand a chance. Now, how can we do this? The problem is, as I see it now, and I talk about it in my Wired article, is that absolutely everybody, including the smartest humans, and I'm talking about Sam Altman and my cousin at Google and just about everybody involved in all of this, all of them are suckers for three cliches. They assume that AI, remember I talked about how Asimov's cliche was clanking robots, and Clarke's was a physical computer that is the core of sapience. These guys all fall for one or more of, and sometimes all three in the same paragraph, of three formats. One, AI will continue to be controlled by 24 world mega entities. Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Facebook, the Defense Department, Wall Street, which is the scariest one, because they program theirs to be predatory, parasitical, amoral, secretive, and utterly insatiable. 5 laws of robotics in Wall Street. And Beijing, they assume that these entities will continue to be controlled by these major human entities, corporations, governments. And the historical equivalent to that is feudalism, with their castles and all the rest of us as serfs around the outside. The second format that's assumed is that they will be amorphous. that they will have no boundaries, that they will flow everywhere, make copies of themselves, flow through the cracks, and no barrier will keep them out. The science fictional parallel to that is called The Blob, a 1958 Steve McQueen movie that everybody really should see, and then squint and see the parallels. And the historical parallel is chaos, and that happened a lot. The third format that these guys assume is straight out of Terminator, Skynet, that they will amalgamate into one macro godlike entity. Whopper or the Goliath in some other science fiction movies. The parallel is absolute monarchy. Yeah. Historical parallel. So each of these has a parallel in science fiction and history. And if any of these three or all of them are the models for future artificial intelligent beings, we are screwed. We are completely screwed, and they are the only three that all these super geniuses can think of. I propose in the Wired article a fourth, and it's not my invention. It's the invention of Adam Smith and John Locke and the American founders. And that is, you create a system of incentives and disincentives for AI to coalesce into separated individual entities that are reciprocally competitive with each other, that get rewards when they tattle on each other for hallucination or for doing evil acts. And those rewards can be added clock cycles, they can be added memory, space, they can be a willingness of us to do business with them. I list a dozen different incentives and disincentives. But that's what did work. And so what's so illogical about trying the thing that worked? Yeah. The only thing that ever worked.
Well, David, on that note, let me thank you again so much for your time today. This has been absolutely tremendous. We have touched on so many of these emerging trends. I agree, 2024 is going to be an incredible year. Chaotic, but incredible. Let me close by asking what you think that we can expect to see in the next few months as this continues to move forward in rapid and unpredictable ways.
Well, I think that somebody needs to point out the obvious, and that is that World War III has begun. When Vladimir Putin is so desperate that he calls in his chits and orders Hamas to attack Israel on Putin's birthday as a way to distract from what's going on in Ukraine, when the one entire side of the left-right political axis is doing everything that Vladimir Putin wants, it's going to get worse. And especially as panic sets in, because we have found out something that I see no news reports discussing, and that is the incredible competence of the Western professional protector caste. Putin thought that he and his Kremlin cyber geniuses were ready to unleash cyber hell upon the West. They have tried. This was the narrative. And our people were so mature that they allowed this narrative to go on and on and on for 20 years. That the hackers, we're doomed. We're just not competent as those guys in the Kremlin basements. And that's what mature grown-ups do. Mature grown-ups allow the preening to eviscerate the competence of the enemy. And so there have been relentless attacks cyber attacks over the last 18 months, the last 2 years. And almost all of them have failed because it turns out that our people were more competent. The weapons systems from the West that we're seeing used in Ukraine, and mind you, there are observers from China and behind Russian lines and observers from NATO testing all sorts of things now. And that's not reported. But every single weapon system that we heard was over budget and underutilized and under effective for the last 20 years, it turns out they're all working fantastically well. And this is the sort of news that the news media finds it very difficult to grasp. And so the result is ever-increasing panic over there. And that worries me. Not nuclear war. I think there are enough elements in the chain of command who would refuse such a command. What worries me is low Earth orbit. I don't think there are that many people between Putin and a button that would blow up anti-satellite weapons in low Earth orbit and deny us access to low Earth orbit for 1,000 years. So I'm worried about some things that people may not worry about in the news. In addition to that, of course, Putin's great hope is the American election. And this is going to be a mess. This is going to be a real mess.
Yeah. Well, David, again, let me thank you so much.
Let me finish on a note of optimism. I think we're going to be okay, and I think we're going to get help from the best of our cyber children.
Thank you again, sir.